The Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for 4 months now. It has led to open carnage on the streets of Ukraine. The quick victory that the Russians had expected has evaporated into thin air, and they're now bogged down in Ukraine. They have failed to take Kiev and seems to only retain control over the eastern parts of Ukraine. This war has had unseen global consequences for the Third World because Ukraine and Russia make up almost 1/3 of the wheat supply of the world. This has led to cost of living crises around the world. This war has been the biggest state-on-state war in Europe since the Yugoslav wars. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, however, is not as old and is fairly very recent, and today we will look into the recent origins of this conflict and the reasons of this war. In 1991, after decades of economic decline, the Soviet Union voluntarily dissolved itself and ended up fracturing into multiple countries. The biggest amongst them was the Russia Federation, or just Russia. One of the many countries that were born thanks to the dissolution of the Soviet Union was Ukraine. It was a direct neighbor of Russia. Not only that, but its eastern half was also majority Russian-speaking and of Russian ethnicity. Russia will use these people to justify their future invasion of Ukraine. Russia spent the 90s falling apart economically and socially. The Russian people were plunged into poverty, and then in 1998 the Russian state declared bankruptcy, making life even harder for Russians. Thankfully, the International Monetary Fund came to bail out the Russian economy with a $22 billion package and saved it. During this time of great peril, the Russian oligarchs were created, leading to vast corruption and inequality. During the Cold War, the United States created a military alliance to fight the Soviet Union called NATO. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the United States expanded NATO into Eastern European countries. All this while the Russians were opposing this relentlessly through diplomatic means, as diplomacy was the only way they could oppose it because of what they were going through at home. During all this time, Ukraine was a great ally and friend of Russia, and this relationship kept going well until 2014. In 2014, the pro-Russia government of Ukraine refused to sign a political and free trade agreement with the EU. This led to the Revolution of Dignity, or more commonly known as Euromaidan protests. These protests led to the overthrow of the pro-Russia Ukrainian government. Russia, being horrified at the thought of Ukraine being aligned with the West and especially joining NATO, invaded the Crimean Peninsula and started supporting the separatists in eastern Ukraine. These are the regions that Russia recognized as independent before the invasion of Ukraine. So in conclusion, the reason they invaded Ukraine is because they did not want Ukraine to join the Western camp through trade and politics, but also they were horrified at the idea of a big neighbor of over 40 million joining NATO. That is why he invaded the Crimean Peninsula, forever closing any hope of making relations better, and then supporting the separatists of eastern Ukraine to destabilize the country, because Putin knew that NATO would never let Ukraine in as long as it's destabilized.